Let's begin with the fallout from the U.S. attack on Iran. President Trump calls damage from the weekend strikes monumental.
New satellite images show significant damage to Iran's Isfahan nuclear sites, the ones that you can see above ground. But military officials are still assessing whether Iran's nuclear capabilities truly have been wiped out.
Meantime, U.S. forces are on alert for potential retaliation from Iran, with Iran warning it will decide the timing, nature, and scale of its response. Eyewitness News reporter Jaysha Patel joins us now with more.
Michelle, Pedro, Brittany, this morning the Israel Defense Forces posted online saying they have struck routes to the Fordo enrichment site to obstruct access. Today, the president is scheduled to meet with his national security team in the Oval Office at 1 p.m. And the big questions moving forward are, what will Iran and President Trump do next? Some are questioning the success of Saturday's attack, but the Trump administration this morning is doubling down, saying they're confident Iran's nuclear sites are obliterated.
You're looking at satellite images showing holes above Iran's nuclear sites. Over the weekend, President Trump announced a top-secret U.S. attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran: Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The Fordo nuclear enrichment facility is believed to be built at least 300 feet deep inside of a mountain. But what's the extent of the damage deep underground? And were nuclear materials moved before the strike? The White House press secretary this morning saying they're sure the U.S. attacks were a success.
We are confident, yes, that Iran's nuclear sites were completely and totally obliterated, as the president said in his address to the nation on Saturday night. And we have a high degree of confidence that where those strikes took place is where Iran's enriched uranium was stored. The president wouldn't have launched the strikes if we weren't confident in that.
The Air Force used 7 B-2 bombers armed with America's most destructive non-nuclear bombs. The mission went entirely undetected, but Iranians are vowing to retaliate. This morning, an Iranian military spokesperson addressed President Trump directly and warned of consequences for Saturday's U.S. strike, saying, quote, "You may start this war, but we will be the ones to finish it." So how could this ongoing conflict in the Middle East affect us here? Homeland Security now warns of a heightened threat environment in the United States, with the potential for low-level cyber attacks on infrastructure, and the likelihood of violent extremists in the homeland independently mobilizing to violence would likely increase. ABC's Pierre Thomas on This Week.
The networks mentioned involve U.S. infrastructure, the energy sector, the electrical grid, financial sector. The bulletin urged infrastructure officials to immediately assess their security to make sure their defenses were strong enough to block any malicious activity by Iran.
And out of an abundance of caution here at home, the NYPD is deploying additional resources to religious, cultural, and diplomatic sites across the city as they continue to monitor what's happening in the Middle East. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you so much. Following the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, Iran and Israel traded a new round of missile strikes.
And an airstrike hit Tehran this morning with explosions heard and felt across the city.
And a missile strike launched by Iran severely damaged an apartment building in Tel Aviv. So to get more, let's go to ABC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Ian Pannell on the ground in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, hi, Pedro, Michelle, Brittany. This is the impact site of one of those Iranian strikes launched in response to the U.S. attacks on 3 nuclear sites. This is a residential apartment block. You can see the entire facade has been blown off. You can see the remnants of people's lives, bedrooms, living rooms, beds. People have been trying to retrieve remnants of their lives. Volunteers have come in to help, as well as the Home Front Command. This happened just hours after the U.S. strikes, and again this morning, multiple sirens, multiple launches from Iran hitting different parts of the country. And after days of silence, we finally heard from Iran's supreme leader posting on X in the middle of the night. Remember, he hasn't been seen for days now. Threatening, not even threatening or mentioning the United States, but instead promising that Israel will be punished. However, other Iranian leaders are now directing threats of retaliation against the US, one writing, "Mr. Trump the gambler, you may start this war, but we'll be the ones to finish it." Meanwhile, Israel launching more attacks on Iran again today. These images released by the Israeli Defense Forces show them striking on Iranian fighter jets in air bases across the country. They're also saying that they attacked access routes into the Fordo nuclear site. Remember, that's one of the sites hit, or certainly targeted by the US. They say that they hit it successfully. But I think there's something else going on here. In a clear attempt to undermine the regime, and after, remember, President Trump raising this specter of regime change, Israel also hitting security sites, including blowing the front doors of a notorious prison inside Iran used to house political prisoners. So you now have Israeli and US officials examining, doing this battlefield damage assessment, trying to work out how successful their strikes on these 3 nuclear facilities were, but also worrying images from satellite showing trucks gathered outside one of those sites a few days before these strikes, raising the question of whether Iran preempted them and moved out nuclear materials. The head of the UN watchdog, the IAEA, saying that the Iranians had told him a few weeks ago that that's exactly what they were thinking of. Guys.
Right, Ian Pannell, thank you. Let's turn now to the White House and what we're learning about how President Donald Trump came to the decision to attack Iran. The administration went to great lengths to conceal the operation.
And this morning, President Trump is raising the question himself of regime change coming out of Iran. Joining us now, more ABC's Chief Washington Correspondent Jonathan Karl. Thank you so much for coming here, talking to us about this.
Thanks for having me here. Yeah.
You talked to the president right after he made the post saying this had happened. What can you tell us about what he told you about why he did this and why he did it now?
Look, it was a short conversation. I think the most significant part of that conversation was actually that he took the call. I mean, it was literally right after the bombs had fallen, before he addressed the country. And the reason why he took the call is he wanted to boast about it. He said, look, this was a tremendous success tonight. He didn't get into a lot of details as to the how, the why, and what next. But he believes that this is a tremendous success. And for the guy that was the non-interventionalist president, we're not going to get involved in forever wars. He's like, he did this and he felt really good about it. Now, we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. How did this all come together? Because there was a 2-week notice he put out there. Yeah. It's going to take me 2 weeks. It seems like it came together, the strike, pretty quickly.
It did. Look, I think when he left the G7 in Canada, remember he left early, came back to have a meeting with his national security team. It was pretty much in motion. He hadn't made the final decision to bomb Iran, but he had greenlit the plan. This is what the plan would be. And then he thought he could have one last effort to get a diplomatic agreement. There were conversations with Erdogan in Turkey of trying to get a meeting. Trump himself even suggested he'd be willing to meet with Iran's president or supreme leader. None of that happened, and he didn't get the response on the diplomacy, and he finally ordered the strike on Saturday. But it was in motion for many days before that.
And speaking of the timing, how is the White House justifying the timing, especially with the tensions already high in the region?
Look, the big question here that we cannot answer is, does this effectively end a long simmering conflict with Iran? I mean, really one that goes back 46 years, 1979, and the revolution. Iran and the United States have been in a state of high tension for a long, long time. The White House views this as finally a way to end Iran's ability to have a nuclear bomb, to put an end to that conflict, or is this the beginning of a new, long, drawn-out war in the Middle East? And that's what the president's critics fear, including some of the president's friends who are critics of this action.
Do we go for regime change? Is that what they're seeking here versus, hey, okay, we depleted their capabilities of creating a nuclear weapon, we're good, do we back out? Or we want to see change?
All of his top advisors yesterday in the wake of the bombing were very careful to say, we don't want regime change. That's not what we're pursuing. I interviewed Vice President J.D. Vance on Sunday, really drilled down on this question. He was like, no, that's not our objective. And then the president goes on Truth Social and said, hey, what's wrong with the regime change? MIGA, I guess it's MIGA. Why not do it? But look, what he was saying, according to his advisors, including Caroline Leavitt coming out today, he's not saying the United States would try to force regime change. He's saying the Iranian people, would be great if they rose up and installed a new government.
Saying not against.
But look, in all of the planning here, the president was asking his people what next. He did not want to be involved in a long conflict in the Middle East, a long military conflict. One and done, overwhelming force on those 3 nuclear sites. If there's more to be done after, he made it clear the Israelis would do the cleanup. So now you start talking about regime change, and it starts to feel like 2003 again in Iraq. So we'll see where that goes. Trust me, that's not what the plan is right now.
All right.
All right.